She was a loving single mother, working hard to get her life back on course.
She was always the one that just bring light to any dark place.
She loved her children. I know that she wanted them back.
She really started hustling and made great progress towards her goals.
How'd it go tonight?
Honey, does this answer your question?
However, fate had other plans.
He sees a woman face down in a pool of blood.
He tried to check to see if she was alive, but he did not find a pulse.
That type of wound will cause somebody to bleed out immediately and die.
The crime scene leaves more questions than answers.
Police see what could look like some drug paraphernalia.
People said that they were arguing for 3 hours and screaming like crazy.
It's stunning that no one reported hearing these gunshots after they went off.
But her family won't rest until justice is served.
The police grabbed me and tried to restrain me and stuff, and I was fighting with them and stuff. Hey, where's my sister?
And when her killer is finally revealed,
my homeboy had sent me an article and I was like, holy.
it's all hands on deck to apprehend him before he vanishes for good.
You can see him just walking across the border into Mexico.
There was a chance they'd never find him.
I wanted him to rot.
July 26th, 2020, Lantana, Florida. It's early Sunday morning in this coastal community just south of Palm Beach.
Lantana's kind of like all the rest of the smaller towns along the East Coast. In Palm Beach County, it's a sleepy beach town.
Despite being so close to a tourist hotspot and on the coastline, Lantana isn't a tourist destination. It's mostly for the locals.
It's a small community, probably about 12,000 residents, middle class, mostly hardworking people who live there.
However, despite its small size, Lantana is no stranger to crime.
Some parts of Lantana, the further east you go, is a little more sketchy, if you will.
It is an area that is pretty high with crime and drugs and just other economic challenges.
At a small, unassuming motel on the east side of town, one of the guests is returning to his room after having a smoke.
When he went outside a few minutes earlier, he noticed the door to another guest room was open, and he didn't think anything of it. But as he's coming back, the door is still open.
His curiosity got the best of him, and he looked inside.
Hey, is anyone in there?
At first, he could only sort of see her legs that were sort of protruding from the edge of the bed because her body was being blocked by the bed.
Miss!
He walks in a little bit further in the room. He sees a woman face down in a pool of blood.
Miss! Miss!
He tried to check to see if she was alive, so he did feel her neck and her arm for a pulse. He did not find a pulse.
He immediately dials 911.
Yeah, I think I just found a dead body.
Within minutes, Lantana investigators are on the scene.
Police are no stranger to this area, and even this motel. This is an area where a lot of crime takes place.
They found the young woman laying on the floor, face down. Her hands were found above her head. And usually when someone is in that position, it would appear that they're trying to protect themselves from something happening. So it could tell the story that this young lady probably knew what was going to happen to her.
It looks like we're dealing with a gunshot wound.
She was struck one time in the neck, a through and through wound, and that type of wound will cause somebody to bleed out immediately and die.
Because of the way she's positioned, police believe that she was most likely crouched behind the bed in fear when the shot went through the mattress and hit her.
But who is she?
They find a wallet on the bed. When they open the wallet, they find the ID. The ID belongs to 29-year-old Denicia Seward.
Wherever Denicia Seward went, joy seemed to follow.
She had a personality out of this world. My sister loved gymnastics, and she loves to dance.
If any time somebody in the room was mad or whatever, she would know how to just make the whole energy change. That happy-go-lucky person, always the one that just bring light to any dark place.
As one of 5 siblings, Denicia always cherished being surrounded by the people who loved her.
I've got a big family, but we always was together until we got grown.
We always had each other's back.
But there was no one Denicia cherished more than her 4 kids.
Denicia loved her children.
She was the best mom.
She was really loving and caring about me. She was a very good person. She was funny.
However, being a single mom came with its fair share of challenges, and Denicia soon found herself struggling to keep up.
She started struggling with drug addiction.
She became overwhelmed by the financial responsibilities of raising 4 kids, and she had to make the difficult decision to let them live with their fathers while she got her finances in order.
She loved her children and she wanted her children. She was really sad that she currently didn't have them, and I know that she wanted them back.
Determined to make ends meet, Denicia got a job as an exotic dancer.
She was down on her luck at this time, and she was living in a motel. She was trying to better her life and get back on her feet.
She was like, I gotta provide my family, and that's what she did. That's what she did, so I respect it.
Denicia also had a supportive boyfriend named Jason Miller that was with her every step of the way.
How'd it go tonight?
Honey, does this answer your question?
They met at the club. He's like a kind of dude that he deals with girls like that, but he fell in like it to my sister.
You are good at what you do, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Jason was known as a bit of a gentle giant.
He's a big guy, but he's a teddy bear.
And he treated Denicia and her family with the utmost respect.
When they first met, he came to me like, look, man, I'm gonna take care of him. I know what people may say about me. I'm like, bro, just don't put your hands on my sister. I'm like, I don't care what you do. She's small, she's this big. Compared to you, she just don't put your hands on my sister.
With Jason by her side, it seemed like only a matter of time before Denicia would turn her life around and get her kids back.
She loved them, they were inseparable.
But Denicia's dreams for a better future are shattered when she's discovered shot to death inside a seedy motel on Lantana's east side.
When the Lantana Police Department began the task of processing the scene, they found evidence throughout the room that there was obviously a party, there was alcohol, there were empty drink containers.
They also see what could look like some drug paraphernalia.
Detectives can't help but wonder, was Denicia's murder the result of a drug deal gone wrong?
29-year-old Denicia Seward was a single mother of 4 who had recently fallen on hard times.
She loved all her kids and would do anything for them.
She always came around when I needed her.
She was really sad that she currently didn't have them, and she wanted them back.
She decided she would do whatever it took to make that happen. So she really started hustling and made great progress towards her goals.
And with her boyfriend, Jason Miller, by her side, things were looking up.
She loved them, they were inseparable. I can't lie, like that was the most happiest I've ever seen her.
But in the early morning hours of July 26th, Denicia has been found brutally murdered in a motel room in Lantana, Florida.
So now they have to figure out who did this to her. In the room, detectives see what could look like some drug paraphernalia.
Detectives can't help but wonder, was Denisia's murder the result of a drug deal gone wrong?
When detectives continue to examine the room, they locate 6 shell casings sprawled across the floor.
It's clear the shot that hit Denisia wasn't the only shot fired that night.
The shell casings match each other. They were all shot from the same firearm.
It was determined that the firearm that was used was a Glock 40, which is a powerful weapon used by the military and most police agencies.
It's stunning that no one reported hearing these gunshots after they went off. But unfortunately, the sound of gunshots is pretty typical in this area.
A lot of times, people just don't want to get involved.
Further complicating things, motel management isn't on site.
Still no answer.
There's not a manager or motel employee detectives can easily speak with to get surveillance footage or more information.
As Lantana police continue trying to get a hold of someone that works at the motel, detectives get whatever limited information they can out of the other motel guests.
Some guests admitted they heard arguing coming from Denisia's room.
I heard arguing around 2:30 a.m.
The guests say it sounded like a male voice.
People said they were arguing for 3 hours and screaming like crazy.
You see what he looked like?
No.
Detectives believe that whoever Denisia was arguing with that night must be the person who killed her.
Meanwhile, news of Denisia's passing spreads throughout the community.
There were lots of people that were posting on social media what they thought was happening at the motel. So her family and friends started to show up at the motel.
I was one of the first ones called, and I even thought it was real. When I had pulled up on the scene, the police grabbed me and tried to restrain me and stuff, and I was fighting with them and stuff.
Dad, my sister's in here. Sorry for your loss. All right, just break it down a little bit, all right?
Once investigators are able to calm Brian down, they try to see if he has any information that could aid in the investigation.
Do you have any idea who could have done this?
No, I have no idea. I just got out of prison.
I had just came home from prison. I never seen her a day alive after I got out.
So no boyfriends or anything that we need to look into?
No.
Brian doesn't believe Denisia's boyfriend, Jason Miller, is capable of this.
Denisia's relationship with her boyfriend Jason wasn't perfect, but no one could imagine him harming her.
He was a heart, but they were just going through trying times right then. She would deal with other dudes just to try to make him feel some type of way.
If Denisia was with another man the night she was killed, are police dealing with the love triangle here?
In July of 2020, police in Lantana, Florida are investigating the mysterious shooting death of 29-year-old Denisia Seward, and her family is still reeling from the tragic news.
Numb. You're just numb. That's the only way I can explain it. I went numb.
Denisia's loved ones have no idea who would do something like this to her.
Denisia had been dating a man named Jason Miller at the time of her death, and their relationship had its ups and downs. But Denisia's brother insists Jason would never do anything to harm her.
He would never do nothing like this.
She would deal with other dudes just to try to make him feel some type of way, but he was a heart.
Upon learning Denisia may have been seeing other men in addition to Jason, detectives must consider a new possibility.
If Denisia was with another man the night she was killed, are police dealing with a love triangle here?
Then when's the last time you had contact with Jason?
3 days ago.
Jason actually called Denisia's brother looking for her 3 days earlier.
He had asked me, can I find her? But she had called me like in the midst of the couple of hours, and she was like, oh, don't tell him where I'm at.
Just then, the man himself arrives on the scene.
I heard what happened.
Jason seems just as devastated by Denisia's passing as her family members.
Do you have any idea who she could have been with last night?
She was with someone?
Detectives must explain to Jason what they've learned from the other motel guests, that Denicia was heard arguing with a male in her room the night before.
I don't know who she was with. She definitely wasn't with me.
Jason says he was working the night shift during that time.
We had a number and name to your employer so that we can call and clear you. This is typical procedural things, okay?
Sure.
Jason is very cooperative, and he seems like he wants to do whatever he can to help with the investigation.
Thanks, fellas. We're sorry for your loss. Thanks.
But as detectives prepare to head back to the station to continue their investigation, they're stopped by another witness.
Denicia's friend, Izzy, comes on the scene. She's extremely emotional because who would expect something like this to happen to their friend?
Is it true? Is Denicia gone?
Izzy tells investigators that she was actually with Denicia in her motel room last night.
Cheers, man.
So that night before Denicia's demise, you have Denicia, Izzy, and two other friends, and they are socializing in the room. They're doing what young people do. They're partying with each other.
One of the guys was our friend Jamie, and the other guy was someone I never met. I think his name was Andre.
Yo, D, give me another drink.
Can you get it yourself?
Izzy could suspect that there was some sort of tension between Andre and Denicia.
Hey, sit still.
Girl, he just in the mood. Anyway, you want a refill?
Sure.
But what about the drug paraphernalia found in the room?
Izzy says they didn't do any drugs that night, but admits Denicia struggled with drug addiction.
After a few hours of drinking, we were getting tired. So I asked Jamie to drive me home. Hey.
What's going on?
Can you take me home?
Sure.
Sometime fairly late or into the early morning hours, they both left together.
The only person left in the room with Denicia was this guy that Izzy only knows as Andre.
Later that day, detectives finally get their hands on the surveillance footage from the motel, and it confirms Izzy's account.
Around 9:34 p.m., they can see Denicia and a man they believe to be Andre arriving at the motel.
A few minutes later, Jamie shows up, and then Izzy arrives pretty soon after that.
Just before 3 a.m., Izzy and Jamie leave together, just like she described to the investigators.
There's no more activity until 3:35 a.m. when detectives can see Andre leaving the motel.
When Andre leaves, the door to the motel room is left ajar.
And no one else enters the motel room until 7:30 a.m. the following morning, when the other motel guest discovers Denicia's body.
For detectives, this can only mean one thing.
This Andre guy is their killer.
Florida detectives investigating the murder of 29-year-old Denicia Seward have just gotten their first big break in the case after obtaining surveillance video from the motel where she was killed.
They can see a man they only know as Andre leave the room shortly before her body was found.
He then goes into a dark-colored sedan and drives off.
When detectives run the plates on the vehicle, it comes back to 28-year-old Andre Ramirez.
At this point, they're certain Andre is their killer.
But surprisingly, Andre's background is completely clean.
Mr. Ramirez did not have a prior criminal history.
So what led him to kill Denicia?
Police need to track down Andre Ramirez immediately. There are still so many questions in this case.
Unfortunately, though, tracking down Andre is no easy task.
He's not at any of his last known addresses, and his phone is going straight to voicemail.
So they put out a bolo.
Next, detectives try contacting those closest to Andre.
The police reach out to his father because they know that if you're on the run, you usually need somebody's help in order to help you financially, or just usually you keep in touch with your family.
The detectives point blank tell him that his son is potentially linked to a murder case.
While Andre's father is shocked by the news, he responds with complete cooperation.
However, his father had said that he didn't know where his son was, and he hadn't spoken with him since the homicide happened.
But he did tell investigators that if he heard from his son, he would call them ASAP.
With still no leads on Andre's whereabouts, detectives sit down with another friend of Denicia's, Jamie Baker.
Thanks for coming in to talk with us, Jamie.
Of course.
Jamie was also there the night Denicia was killed.
And he knows more about Denicia's relationship with Andre Ramirez than Izzy does.
We go way back.
He actually went to middle school with both of them, so they sort of grew up together.
Jamie says that Denicia and Andre had recently rekindled a friendship, but soon that friendship became something more.
They were kind of on and off again, and there was no indication that they were in any sort of committed or serious relationship with one another.
Denicia's true commitment was to Jason.
So Izzy mentioned that Andre seemed to be upset that night you all were hanging out. Do you have any idea what he was upset about?
Was he jealous of Jason?
Nah. I don't even think he knew about Jason.
He suggests one of the problems in the relationship might have been Andre's issues with Denicia's job as an exotic dancer.
He tells the detectives that Andre confided in him about his issues and concerns with Denicia. Andre started to get a little insecure because she was a very beautiful woman and because of her profession. So there was room for jealousy, there was room for mistrust.
But was that enough motive for murder?
To the detectives, it still feels like something is missing here.
Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Andre's father receives an unexpected call from his son.
Hello? Hey, Dad. Andre? Son, where are you? The police are looking for you.
He asked where Andre was, but Andre would not tell him where he was located.
Andre did acknowledge to his father that he felt that he had failed his family, he had failed himself. His father is asking him to turn himself in, but he's fleeing.
Listen, you've got to come back.
We can't.
I think this is just a big misunderstanding.
I'm sorry I let you down, Dad.
I've got to go.
Hello?
Andre's father immediately informs police about the phone call.
To detectives, the phone call is a clear admission of guilt.
It doesn't sound like he has any plans of coming back and facing the consequences. He's now on the run.
But the number Andre called from gives detectives a clue to his current whereabouts.
Andre's father says he didn't recognize the number that Andre called him from. It wasn't his main cell phone number.
I think it was a 404 number in Georgia.
So police officers speculate that he had to have got a phone, such as a track phone or a burner phone, in Georgia.
Could Andre still be there now?
It's possible he's hiding out somewhere in Georgia, but it's also possible he had just picked up this burner phone when he was passing through Georgia to his next destination.
Seeing the great lengths Andre has gone to evade capture, Lantana detectives decide to call in federal support.
The local police department doesn't have the capability to track a fugitive. So when you have a fugitive and he's left the state, you contact the U.S. Marshal's office.
They have the resources and the technology to track even burner phones, especially once they know the phone number, which they were able to acquire from Andre's father.
Lantana investigators also turn to the public for help.
A Crime Stoppers tip line offers a reward up to $3,000 for any tips leading to an arrest.
During this time, Denicia's loved ones are starting to grow restless.
It was frustrating because we wanted justice. But, I mean, we can't do the job that the police can do, so really, we just had to just wait and pray that he got caught.
And on July 29th, U.S. Marshals finally make a breakthrough in the case.
They're able to trace Andre's burner phone from the location where he first purchased it near Georgia through 3 other states: Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana.
Now, the phone is pinging almost 1,500 miles away in Texas.
Investigators are able to continue following Andre through Texas, where he finally stops in the city of Laredo.
U.S. Marshals actually notified authorities in Laredo, letting them know that Andre's phone was pinging in the area.
But there's one big problem.
Laredo is a stone's throw from the border.
And surveillance footage confirms investigators' worst fears.
You can see Mr. Ramirez basically parking his car and heading in the direction of the border.
Andre has fled to Mexico.
By July 2020, investigators have zeroed in on Andre Ramirez as the prime suspect in the murder of 29-year-old Denicia Seward.
However, he's now on the run.
He was last spotted in Laredo, Texas.
Authorities in Laredo locate Andre's abandoned car, but there's no sign of their fugitive.
They did a processing of that car.
In the trunk, he's got a speed loader for a Glock 40 that matched the type of casings that were located and the projectiles located on the scene. But they didn't find the weapon.
And surveillance footage confirms investigators' worst fears.
You can see Mr. Ramirez basically parking his car and heading in the direction of the border and basically just walking across the border into Mexico.
So now it's safe to say that Andre has fled to Mexico.
However, U.S. authorities aren't giving up.
At this point, all hands are on deck. You have the U.S. Marshals, you have the Mexican police, and then you have the authorities in Laredo. They are working together to make sure that they are able to secure Andre.
But several more months pass with no signs of Andre. And Denicia's loved ones start losing hope they'll ever see justice served in her case.
Like, this dude, there's no way he should have went on the run that long. Like, come on, like, that's crazy. Like, I don't even understand that.
He took my sister. I wanted him to rot.
With pressure mounting, Lantana detectives press on and continue building their case.
In early August, Lantana police get a call from one of Andre's friends.
He believes Andre stole a gun from him, and that was a gun used to kill Denicia.
All right, can you walk me through from when the last time you saw it and all the way through?
We went out to like shooting. It was on a Friday.
He and Andre had gone target shooting 2 weeks or so before the murder.
After they were done at the shooting range, Andre asked to borrow his gun for a while.
Okay. What kind of gun was it?
It was a Glock 40-22.
And the gun was never returned.
You saw what's going on with him though, right?
Yeah, my homeboy had sent me an article and I was like, holy.
So after he realized that Miss Seward was killed, that Andre Ramirez was missing, and that he was nowhere to be found, this friend then contacted law enforcement because he was concerned that this gun, if it did show up, it would come back registered to him, and he didn't want to be on the hook for this homicide.
But unfortunately, Andre's friend has no idea where he is now.
He hadn't spoken to him since that day at the shooting range.
However, when detectives get their hands on the cell phone records from Andre's main device, they finally start to get more answers on the motive in this crime.
Like Jamie described, Denicia and Andre appear to have had a very on and off relationship.
Things really started to become sticky between them, and it kind of escalates into this tense relationship.
It didn't help the situation when the couple's romantic relationship evolved into a working relationship.
In addition to being an exotic dancer, Denicia started working as an escort with the help of Andre.
We're going to be making money like you've never seen before.
Detectives found ads outlining Denicia's services on several platforms paid for by Andre.
He would also pay for her motel rooms and food while she was escorting.
These escorts, I mean, in Florida, they make quite a bit of money. So he was making money off her. What he did is he took a percentage of what she was doing. He get a motel room, and she could make up to $500 to $1,000 a night, depending on what the client was paying.
But through the text messages, it appears that Denicia eventually became uncomfortable with this setup.
In the text messages, detectives are able to see the distress that Denicia was in because she was constantly telling Andre about the things that she did not like in their relationship.
How'd it go?
Fine.
Let me see.
She felt that she was being mistreated or maybe even used. It does seem that she had expectations of him to be her protector, that she believed that there was more to the relationship than perhaps him helping profit from her body, which, looks like what happened here.
Andre, I don't want to do this anymore.
What?
Andre still tried to maintain control through saying, different things to kind of appeal to her heartstrings.
Baby, let's think about this for a second. Don't you want your kids back?
Yeah, but...
Baby, we're so close. Just look at this cash.
This is what you often see in an abusive relationship. Not all abuse is physical. And this sounded like this was more so about dominance and control.
Got another guy coming the next few hours. Get yourself cleaned up, okay?
If Denicia refused to let Andre control her, is that what sent Andre over the edge?
Now more than ever, investigators are desperate to track down Andre Ramirez.
With Andre having fled to Mexico, there was a chance they'd never find him.
But on July 9th, 2021, nearly a year after Denicia was killed, Lantana detectives get the call they've been waiting for.
Lantana homicide.
Mexican authorities found Andre.
Andre has been detained and he is in custody.
"29-year-old Andre Ramirez, wanted for the murder of Denicia Seward, crossed the Mexican border in a bid to evade capture.
For nearly a year, Andre had been successful in his escape.
But on July 9th, 2021, Andre's escape comes to an end.
Lantana homicide.
After months of dedicated police work, the U.S. Marshals finally developed a lead on Andre's location and coordinated with Mexican authorities to apprehend him.
Andre has been detained and he is in custody.
After Andre is extradited back to Florida, Lantana detectives finally get to sit down with the man that's been consuming their investigation for the past year.
So nice to finally meet you.
You've been a busy guy.
But if detectives were hoping to get a confession out of Andre, they're out of luck.
It's time for you to come clean and tell us what happened.
I have nothing to tell you. I want an attorney.
Immediately, he lawyers up.
Are you sure, Andre? This is your last chance to tell us your side.
I'm sure.
But even without a confession, investigators are able to formulate a theory as to what happened on the night of July 25th.
Based on the statements from Izzy and Jamie, it's clear that there was some tension between Andre and Denicia that night.
Hey, what's this deal?
Girl, he just in the mood.
Investigators believe that tension had been building between Andre and Denicia because she didn't want to keep escorting. She was ready to quit.
But Andre was making a lot of money off of her, and he wanted to keep making that money.
Just before 3 a.m., Izzy and Jamie went home, leaving Denicia and Andre alone in the motel room.
One can only speculate what may have gone down in the room once everyone left.
But one thing is clear. The couple got into an argument that ensued for hours.
Multiple motel guests reported hearing it.
I'm so sick and tired of you taking advantage of me.
Where do you think you'd be without me, huh?
At some point, Andre drew the .40 caliber handgun he'd stolen from his friend.
What are you doing? Put that away.
Once Denicia realized what was about to happen, she ducked behind the bed for cover.
But it was too late.
Andre sprayed the room with bullets, one of which went through the mattress and hit Denicia.
Oh my God.
After she was dead, he probably started to panic.
He left the motel and started planning his escape,
which eventually led him to Mexico.
He didn't just drive home, he just drove and drove and drove until he ended up driving all the way to Texas and then fleeing to Mexico. This was a man who knew he just did something wrong, knew he did something horrible, knew he took her life, and just wanted to get out of there as fast as he could.
Andre Ramirez is charged with second-degree murder.
Prosecutors decided to go with second-degree murder charges in this case because they couldn't prove the crime was premeditated.
We didn't have any evidence to suggest that this was an intentional act. It seemed like it was a heat of passion type of thing.
But in Florida, the maximum penalty for second-degree murder is still pretty strict.
The maximum sentence for second-degree murder is life.
And with the plethora of evidence against him, Andre sees the writing on the wall.
Ultimately, Mr. Ramirez decided to accept a plea in this case. He pled to second-degree murder and agreed to spend 20 years in the Department of Corrections.
So in this type of case here, he's got to do 85% of that time. So he's still young enough to come out around the age of 50.
For Denicia's loved ones, it's a shockingly lenient sentence.
I'm glad he's not able to hurt anyone else, but I always feel like how you take someone out, that's how you should go.
I didn't truly understand the meaning behind it, but, you know, I guess death is not for us to understand.
No matter how you look at this is a senseless tragedy, and it should have never happened, and she deserved better.
That was my mom, and I love her a lot, and I miss her.
I just miss her presence, her goofiness. That's my only sister, you know? You never get another sister back. We all wish she was here, but she still is in spirit.
Like, I love her that much. Like, a lot of people say, oh, why you bringing her back up? But this is what I like. I feel like she's right here. You feel me? I feel like she's right here.
I want people to know that she was a very loving, kind, smart young lady, And I hope that this is gonna touch other women. If you have any signs or see signs of abuse, get help. Call somebody. Tell somebody. And it may save a life. And that's what I hope that we can get by doing this for Denicia Seward.
California in the mid-1970s was a place of remarkable growth. New housing developments stretched across Sacramento and the surrounding suburbs. Young families moved into quiet neighborhoods believing they had found safety, stability, and the promise of a better future. Streets were lined with modest homes, children rode bicycles until sunset, and neighbors rarely locked every door before going to bed. Violent crime existed, but few residents imagined that an offender would repeatedly enter occupied homes at night, attack strangers, and disappear without leaving investigators a name. In June 1976, law enforcement in Sacramento County began investigating a series of nighttime residential burglaries that initially appeared unrelated. The offender entered homes while occupants slept, stealing small personal items rather than objects of significant monetary value. Detectives observed that the burglar often demonstrated familiarity with the neighborhoods and appeared comfortable moving through residential areas after dark. Although the crimes were concerning, they did not initially suggest the pattern of violence that would soon emerge. Only weeks later, the nature of the investigation changed dramatically. Reports of sexual assaults committed by an unknown intruder began reaching investigators. The offender typically entered homes during the night after selecting residences in suburban neighborhoods. In several documented attacks, he surprised victims while they slept, threatened them with a weapon, and exercised prolonged control over the scene before escaping. Detectives recognized similarities among the offenses and concluded that a single individual was likely responsible. The unknown offender demonstrated planning and caution. He frequently approached homes under cover of darkness, selected points of entry that reduced the likelihood of detection, and appeared familiar with neighborhood layouts. Investigators believed he often studied areas before committing offenses, although determining precisely how he selected victims proved difficult. The attacks created widespread fear throughout Sacramento County because they occurred in ordinary neighborhoods where residents had previously felt secure. Law enforcement agencies responded by forming specialized investigative teams. Detectives collected physical evidence from each crime scene, photographed entry points, documented the condition of the residences, and interviewed victims in an effort to identify recurring patterns. Although forensic science in the mid-1970s lacked the DNA technologies available today, investigators carefully preserved fingerprints, show impressions, trace evidence, and biological material whenever possible. The offender's behavior presented unusual investigative challenges. He varied his routes of approach and escape, struck across multiple jurisdictions, and often committed offenses during hours when witnesses were unlikely to be present. Patrol operations increased throughout affected communities, and officers responded rapidly to reports of suspicious activity, yet the offender consistently avoided capture. As additional attacks occurred, investigators began comparing case files more systematically. Similar methods of entry, offender behavior, and victim accounts suggested a continuing series rather than isolated incidents. Detectives shared information across agencies in an effort to determine whether crimes occurring in neighboring jurisdictions might be connected. Public concern grew rapidly. Newspapers reported on the attacks while encouraging residents to remain alert. Community meetings were organized so that law enforcement officials could provide crime prevention information and answer questions from anxious residents. Families installed stronger locks, exterior lighting, and neighborhood watch programs became more common. Despite these precautions, uncertainty persisted because investigators could not predict where the offender would strike next. Victims provided investigators with valuable descriptions of the offender's conduct during the attacks, but identifying an unknown individual from these accounts alone proved extremely difficult. Investigators developed numerous leads, interviewed persons of interest, and examined individuals whose criminal histories or circumstances warranted further inquiry. Many tips appeared promising initially, but were eliminated through continued investigation. The offender became known by the name East Area Rapist, a title reflecting the geographic concentration of many early attacks in the eastern Sacramento area. As the investigation expanded, however, detectives remained cautious about drawing conclusions regarding the offender's identity, occupation, or motives without supporting evidence. Crime laboratories examined every available item recovered from the scenes. Although forensic capabilities were limited compared with modern standards, investigators understood that preserving evidence was essential. Biological evidence in particular was retained whenever possible because emerging scientific techniques suggested that future laboratory developments might eventually provide additional investigative opportunities. The investigation also highlighted the importance of cooperation between agencies. Because crimes occurred across jurisdictional boundaries, detectives increasingly recognized that information sharing would be critical. Meetings were held to compare evidence, discuss offender behavior, and coordinate investigative strategies. These collaborative efforts represented an important step in understanding the broader pattern of offenses. Despite extensive investigative activity, the offender continued to evade law enforcement. Patrol saturation, public awareness campaigns, neighborhood vigilance, and repeated investigative reviews failed to produce an arrest. The unknown assailant appeared capable of adapting his methods while maintaining a pattern that suggested deliberate planning. Looking back, investigators have emphasized that many of the procedures implemented during these early years, including meticulous evidence collection, comprehensive documentation, and long-term evidence preservation, proved invaluable decades later. Although the technology necessary to identify the offender did not yet exist, the careful work performed during the original investigations ensured that critical evidence would remain available for future scientific examination. The opening phase of what would later become known as the Golden State Killer investigation established the central challenge that would define the case for decades. Law enforcement knew a dangerous serial offender was operating across California. They documented recurring patterns, collected physical evidence, and devoted substantial resources to identifying him. Yet, despite these efforts, the offender remained unidentified, leaving investigators with an expanding series of linked crimes and a growing determination to understand who was responsible. Long before investigators connected a series of sexual assaults in the Sacramento area, detectives in California's Central Valley had been investigating an unusually persistent burglar. Between 1974 and 1975, the city of Visalia experienced a large number of residential break-ins attributed to an unknown offender who became known as the Visalia Ransacker. The burglar frequently entered occupied homes, stole seemingly random personal items, and demonstrated an apparent willingness to spend considerable time inside residences. Although investigators recognized the unusual nature of the crimes, they did not initially know whether the offender would later be linked to other violent offenses. The Visalia Police Department devoted substantial resources to the investigation. Detectives documented each burglary in detail, recording methods of entry, property taken, and the layout of affected neighborhoods. Crime scene technicians photographed evidence, collected fingerprints where possible, and searched for trace evidence that might identify the offender. At the time, forensic DNA analysis was not available as an investigative tool, making traditional detective work the primary method for pursuing leads. Investigators observed recurring patterns. The offender often targeted residential neighborhoods, appeared familiar with local streets, and sometimes stole inexpensive or highly personal items rather than valuables of significant financial worth. These choices complicated the investigation because they suggested motives that differed from those of many conventional property crimes. Residents became increasingly concerned as the number of burglaries grew. Community meetings were held to discuss crime prevention, and law enforcement encouraged homeowners to report suspicious activity immediately. Patrols were increased in affected areas, while officers attempted to identify patterns in the offender's movements. During the investigation, officers received numerous tips from members of the public. Witnesses reported unfamiliar vehicles, suspicious individuals, and unusual nighttime activity. Detectives carefully evaluated these reports, comparing them with known timelines and crime locations. Many leads proved unrelated, but each was documented as part of the expanding investigation. The investigation intensified after confrontations occurred between the suspected offender and responding officers. These incidents demonstrated that the unknown individual was willing to take significant risks to avoid capture. As a result, law enforcement agencies increased surveillance efforts and expanded coordination among investigators. Years later, investigators reviewing historical evidence considered whether the Visalia burglaries might be connected to the later East Area rapist offenses and, ultimately, to the crimes attributed to the Golden State Killer. This assessment drew upon multiple factors, including similarities in offender behavior, geographic movement, and subsequent forensic evidence. Modern investigative findings have led law enforcement to conclude that the Visalia ransacker crimes are attributable to Joseph James DiAngelo, although those connections were not understood during the original investigations. The Visalia investigation illustrates the challenges faced by detectives before the widespread use of modern forensic science. Investigators relied on witness interviews, physical evidence, patrol activity, and careful comparison of crime reports. Although these methods established important investigative foundations, they were insufficient to identify the offender at the time. The preservation of investigative records from the Visalia burglaries later became valuable when law enforcement agencies revisited historical cases. Crime reports, photographs, evidence logs, and witness statements allowed investigators to compare older incidents with crimes committed elsewhere in California. Maintaining comprehensive documentation across many years proved essential in reconstructing the offender's criminal history. The Visalia ransacker investigation also demonstrated the importance of interagency cooperation. At the time the burglaries occurred, local investigators had no definitive reason to believe they were examining the early crimes of an offender who would later become associated with a statewide series of violent offenses. Only after decades of additional investigation, improved forensic science, and broader information sharing did those historical connections become clearer. Today, the Visalia burglaries are widely regarded by investigators and criminal justice researchers as a significant early chapter in the broader Golden State Killer investigation. They underscore how seemingly isolated property crimes can later assume greater investigative significance when viewed alongside evidence developed through subsequent investigations. The case remains an important example of the value of preserving evidence, maintaining detailed investigative records, and periodically reassessing historical cases as forensic technology evolves. Those principles, established during investigations in the mid-1970s, ultimately contributed to a much broader understanding of one of California's most significant serial crime investigations. By late 1976, investigators in Sacramento County recognized they were no longer dealing with isolated crimes. The pattern had become unmistakable. Multiple nighttime home invasions shared consistent characteristics, and detectives concluded that a single offender was likely responsible. As additional attacks occurred, the investigation expanded from a local inquiry into one of California's largest serial crime investigations. The offender's method of operation displayed a high degree of consistency while also adapting over time. He typically entered occupied homes during nighttime hours after selecting residential neighborhoods. Investigators believed he often spent time observing areas before committing offenses, although establishing the extent of this surveillance proved difficult. Victims consistently described an offender who appeared organized, prepared, and determined to maintain control over the situation. Sacramento County Sheriff's Office investigators established specialized teams to coordinate the growing number of reports. Detectives compared crime scene documentation, interviewed victims, reviewed patrol activity, and examined physical evidence recovered from each location. Because the crime shared common characteristics, investigators centralized information to identify recurring patterns that individual case files might not reveal. Victim interviews became one of the most important components of the investigation. Detectives documented detailed accounts regarding the offender's actions, methods of entry, statements made during the crimes, and the sequence of events. These interviews were conducted with considerable care, recognizing both the traumatic nature of the offenses and the importance of preserving accurate investigative information. Crime scene investigators collected every available form of physical evidence. Fingerprints, show impressions, tool marks, fibers, hairs, and biological evidence were documented whenever present. Although forensic DNA profiling would not become available for criminal investigations until years later, investigators preserved biological material according to accepted evidence handling procedures whenever possible. As additional jurisdictions reported similar offenses, cooperation among law enforcement agencies became increasingly important. Detectives exchanged investigative reports, maps, suspect information, and forensic findings. These collaborative efforts helped establish that the offender's activities extended beyond a single neighborhood and required a coordinated regional response. Public concern continued to increase. Residents installed improved locks, exterior lighting, alarm systems, and neighborhood watch programs. Law enforcement agencies distributed crime prevention information, encouraging residents to report suspicious activity promptly and to remain alert during nighttime hours. Community meetings provided opportunities for investigators to explain what could safely be shared without compromising the investigation. Despite extensive publicity, identifying the offender remained difficult. Investigators received thousands of tips from members of the public. Every lead required evaluation, ranging from reports of suspicious vehicles to information regarding individuals whose behavior appeared unusual. Detectives compared these reports against known timelines and available evidence, eliminating many possibilities through interviews and corroboration. The investigation also relied upon behavioral analysis. Detectives examined recurring aspects of the offender's conduct to better understand how he selected neighborhoods, approached residences, and avoided detection. While behavioral observations helped guide investigative strategies, they were treated as analytical tools rather than evidence identifying any particular individual. As the number of linked crimes increased, investigators devoted substantial resources to surveillance operations. Officers conducted nighttime patrols in affected neighborhoods, responded rapidly to reports of suspicious activity, and attempted to identify patterns that might predict future offenses. Although these operations occasionally generated promising investigative leads, the offender consistently avoided apprehension. Forensic laboratories continued examining evidence recovered from multiple crime scenes. Advances in serological testing allowed scientists to compare certain biological characteristics, but the technology available during the 1970s could not identify an unknown individual with the precision that DNA profiling would later provide. Nevertheless, investigators preserved evidence carefully, recognizing its potential future value. The expanding investigation also highlighted the importance of comprehensive record management. Detectives created detailed case files documenting each offense, including crime scene photographs, witness statements, forensic reports, maps, and investigative summaries. These records would later become essential when investigators revisited the case using modern forensic methods. As months passed, the offender's attacks continued despite intensive investigative efforts. The inability to identify or arrest the individual created increasing frustration among investigators and heightened concern within affected communities. Law enforcement agencies remained committed to pursuing every credible lead while continuing to preserve evidence for future examination. Looking back, this phase of the investigation illustrates the strengths and limitations of homicide and major crime investigations before the widespread use of forensic DNA analysis. Detectives employed extensive traditional investigative methods, coordinated across jurisdictions, and documented evidence meticulously. Although these efforts did not immediately identify the offender, they established the investigative foundation that later generations of detectives and forensic scientists would rely upon when advances in DNA technology transformed the case decades later. As investigators worked to identify the offender responsible for the East Area Rapist attacks, another troubling development emerged. Beginning in the late 1970s, a series of homicides in Southern California displayed similarities that would later draw the attention of detectives reviewing unsolved violent crimes across multiple jurisdictions. At the time, however, these investigations were handled independently by local law enforcement agencies, and no definitive statewide connection had yet been established. The murders occurred in different communities and were investigated by separate police departments and sheriff's offices. Detectives focused on the evidence available within their own jurisdictions, documenting crime scenes, interviewing witnesses, and collecting physical evidence according to the forensic standards of the period. Without modern information sharing systems, comparing cases across hundreds of miles presented significant logistical challenges. Crime scene investigators processed each location methodically. They photographed evidence, documented points of entry and exit, recovered trace materials where possible, and preserved biological evidence for laboratory examination. Although DNA profiling was not yet available, experienced investigators recognized that biological evidence could become valuable as forensic science progressed, and therefore maintained careful evidence retention procedures. As additional homicides occurred, investigators began comparing offender behavior across cases. Similarities in methods of entry, victim selection, and aspects of offender conduct prompted discussions about whether a single offender might be responsible. These comparisons formed part of a broader analytical process rather than serving as definitive proof that the crimes were connected. The offender's apparent ability to avoid detection complicated every investigation. In many cases, There were no eyewitnesses capable of identifying the individual. Detectives instead relied on physical evidence, neighborhood canvases, timelines, and witness observations of suspicious activity before or after the crimes. Patrol officers interviewed residents, searched for unusual vehicles, and documented information that might later acquire greater significance. Media coverage increased as the number of serious offenses grew. Newspapers and television stations reported on the investigations, while law enforcement agencies released limited information to encourage public assistance without compromising investigative integrity. Detectives balanced the need for community cooperation against the importance of preserving details known only to investigators and the offender. The absence of immediate forensic identification tools meant investigators depended heavily on traditional police work. Persons of interest were interviewed, alibis were examined, criminal histories reviewed, and available physical evidence compared with known suspects where appropriate. Many investigative leads ultimately proved unrelated, but each required careful evaluation before being eliminated. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, communication among California law enforcement agencies gradually improved. Detectives responsible for major violent crime investigations increasingly exchanged reports, forensic findings, and investigative observations. These collaborative efforts laid the groundwork for later assessments that considered whether offenses previously investigated separately might actually be linked. Forensic laboratories also continued advancing their analytical capabilities. While DNA identification remained unavailable, improvements in evidence examination, photography, microscopy, and laboratory documentation strengthened the quality of preserved investigative material. Agencies increasingly recognized that properly maintained evidence could remain valuable even if current technology could not fully exploit it. Years later, when investigators revisited these historical cases using modern forensic methods, the importance of those early investigative decisions became apparent. Detailed reports, preserved biological evidence, photographs, and carefully maintained chain of custody records allowed forensic scientists to re-examine material collected decades earlier. Without those records and preservation efforts, many later comparisons would have been impossible. The eventual understanding that multiple crime series were connected did not arise from a single discovery. Rather, it developed through years of investigative review, interagency cooperation, forensic analysis, and the gradual accumulation of evidence. This process illustrates how complex serial investigations often evolve over time, particularly when crimes occur across multiple jurisdictions. Today, criminal justice researchers frequently cite this phase of the investigation as an example of the importance of regional cooperation in major crime investigations. The case demonstrated that offenders operating across jurisdictional boundaries may not be fully understood until investigators compare evidence collectively rather than examining each offense in isolation. This stage of the investigation also reinforced a principle that remains central to modern policing: preserving evidence and maintaining comprehensive investigative records are investments in the future. Scientific capabilities continue to evolve, and evidence collected during one generation of forensic practice may become significantly more informative under the next. The careful work performed during these investigations ultimately ensured that future investigators would inherit a strong evidentiary foundation for re-examining one of California's most significant serial crime cases. For several years, investigators across California worked on violent crime investigations that, at first, appeared to have no direct relationship. Different law enforcement agencies were responsible for crimes committed in separate jurisdictions, each focusing on evidence collected within its own geographic area. As a result, detectives initially pursued their investigations independently, relying on local witnesses, physical evidence, and investigative leads. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, communication between agencies gradually increased. Detectives began comparing reports describing offender behavior, methods of entry, crime scene characteristics, and victim accounts. Although similarities alone could not establish that the same individual had committed multiple offenses, the comparisons encouraged investigators to examine whether certain cases might be linked. One important factor was the preservation of physical evidence. Crime scene investigators had retained biological samples, photographs, reports, and other forensic material from numerous investigations. Although forensic DNA profiling was not yet available when many of the crimes occurred, proper evidence handling ensured that these materials remained available for future examination. As forensic science advanced during the 1980s and 1990s, laboratories gained the ability to compare DNA profiles developed from biological evidence recovered at different crime scenes. These analyses allowed investigators to determine whether offenses that had once been investigated separately were connected through the same unknown individual. The DNA comparisons established that multiple crimes committed in different regions of California were linked to a single offender. This finding significantly changed the direction of the investigation. Rather than several unrelated investigations, law enforcement agencies now recognized they were pursuing one individual responsible for offenses committed across multiple jurisdictions over an extended period. The confirmation also highlighted the importance of interagency cooperation. Detectives from different counties shared investigative files, laboratory results, witness information, and historical records. This collaboration enabled investigators to reconstruct a broader timeline of the offender's criminal activity than any individual agency could have developed independently. The process required extensive review of historical records. Detectives examined thousands of pages of reports, maps, witness interviews, forensic analyses, and evidence inventories compiled over many years. Investigators sought to identify recurring patterns while ensuring that conclusions remained supported by documented evidence rather than assumptions. Public awareness also evolved during this period. Media organizations increasingly reported that investigators believed the crimes were connected, bringing renewed attention to cases that had remained unresolved for many years. Families of victims, investigators, and community members hoped that advances in forensic science would eventually identify the unknown offender. Despite the significant breakthrough linking the crimes, investigators still did not know the offender's identity. DNA confirmed that the same person was responsible for multiple offenses, but no corresponding profile existed in available law enforcement databases. The investigation therefore entered a new phase. Investigators knew they were searching for one individual, yet they still lacked a name. The absence of a database match illustrated an important limitation of forensic investigations during that period. DNA evidence can identify an individual only if an appropriate comparison sample exists. Without such a sample, investigators may know that crimes are connected while remaining unable to identify the offender directly. As a result, detectives continued relying on traditional investigative methods alongside forensic analysis. They reviewed historical suspects, reassessed witness statements, examined employment records where appropriate, and revisited investigative theories developed during earlier stages of the case. Each new technological advance prompted another review of the available evidence. The investigation also influenced future law enforcement practices. agencies increasingly recognize the importance of sharing information across jurisdictions, preserving evidence for long periods, and conducting periodic reviews of unsolved violent crimes. These practices became increasingly common as cold case units expanded throughout the United States. Looking back, the effort to connect the California cases demonstrated that solving long-term investigations often depends on combining traditional detective work with evolving forensic science. The identification of a common offender did not result from a single discovery. Instead, it emerged through decades of careful evidence preservation, scientific advancement, and cooperation among numerous investigators and forensic specialists. Today, this phase of the investigation is widely regarded as a turning point. By establishing that multiple crimes were committed by the same unknown individual, investigators transformed several independent investigations into one of the largest coordinated serial crime investigations in California history, setting the stage for the forensic developments that would follow many years later. By the mid-1980s, investigators had amassed thousands of pages of reports, hundreds of interviews, and an extensive collection of physical evidence. Yet, despite years of investigative work, the offender remained unidentified. The crimes had occurred across multiple California jurisdictions, involving numerous law enforcement agencies, each contributing information to what had become one of the state's most complex serial crime investigations. As active offenses attributed to the offender ceased, the nature of the investigation changed. Rather than responding to new crime scenes, detectives shifted their focus toward preserving evidence, organizing investigative records, and periodically reviewing unresolved leads. The investigation entered what law enforcement commonly refers to as a cold case-an, open investigation in which immediate investigative avenues have been exhausted, but which remains subject to future review. Cold cases present unique challenges. Witness memories become less reliable over time, physical locations change, and investigators retire or transfer to other assignments. Maintaining continuity therefore depends heavily upon detailed documentation. In the Golden State Killer investigation, agencies preserved crime scene photographs, laboratory reports, interview summaries, evidence inventories, and investigative notes so that future detectives could understand the work completed by earlier investigators. During this period, forensic science continued to evolve. In the late 1980s and throughout the 1990s, DNA profiling became an increasingly important investigative tool. Laboratories revisited biological evidence preserved from older cases, developing genetic profiles that had not been possible when many of the crimes originally occurred. Investigators submitted available DNA profiles for comparison through the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, the national law enforcement database used to compare qualifying forensic DNA profiles with DNA collected under applicable laws. Detectives hoped the unknown offender would eventually appear in the database through an unrelated criminal investigation. Year after year, however, no qualifying match was identified. Although disappointing, the absence of a database match did not diminish the significance of the forensic evidence. Investigators recognized that the offender's DNA might simply not exist within CODIS. A person without a qualifying conviction or legally collected DNA sample would not appear in the system, regardless of the strength of the crime scene evidence. The investigation therefore continued through periodic review rather than continuous field activity. Detectives reassessed historical suspects, examined newly received tips, and compared the case with advances in forensic methodology. Each technological improvement prompted another evaluation of whether preserved evidence could provide additional information. Interagency cooperation became increasingly important during these reviews. Agencies responsible for crimes committed decades earlier continued sharing records, laboratory findings, and investigative analyses. Advances in digital record management also improved investigators' ability to search historical files, compare case information, and identify previously overlooked connections. Public interest in the case never disappeared entirely. Books, newspaper articles, television documentaries, and academic discussions periodically renewed attention to the investigation. These publications generated additional public tips, although none immediately identified the offender. Nevertheless, investigators evaluated credible information whenever it was received. One enduring strength of the investigation was the quality of the original evidence preservation. Crime scene investigators in the 1970s had carefully collected biological evidence despite having no access to the sophisticated DNA technologies that would later become available. Their adherence to established forensic procedures ensured that the evidence remained suitable for increasingly advanced laboratory analysis. By the early 21st century, cold case units throughout the United States were achieving success through improved forensic science. Historical homicide investigations that had remained unsolved for decades were being reopened as laboratories developed more sensitive DNA testing methods. These successes encouraged investigators responsible for the Golden State Killer investigation to continue preserving evidence and monitoring scientific developments. The case also became an example frequently discussed within law enforcement training. Detectives emphasized the importance of meticulous crime scene documentation, long-term evidence preservation, and comprehensive investigative records. Although these practices had not yet identified the offender, they ensured that future investigators would inherit a strong evidentiary foundation. As years passed without a direct DNA database match, investigators increasingly recognized that identifying the unknown offender might require methods beyond conventional forensic comparisons. Scientific advances were continuing at a rapid pace, and researchers were developing new approaches capable of generating investigative leads even when no direct database match existed. Those emerging techniques had not yet become standard investigative practice, but they represented a significant shift in forensic science. Instead of asking whether the offender's DNA already existed in a criminal database, investigators began considering whether genetic relationships themselves could become investigative clues. This possibility marked the beginning of a new chapter in the history of cold case investigations. After decades of careful evidence preservation, patient investigative review, and continual scientific progress, the foundation had been laid for a method that would ultimately transform not only the For decades, investigators possessed one critical piece of evidence that consistently pointed toward the unknown offender: a forensic DNA profile developed from biological evidence collected during the original investigations. Although the profile established that many of the crimes were committed by the same individual, traditional law enforcement databases did not identify the source. By the 2010s, investigators began exploring a new forensic methodology that had recently shown promise in several historical investigations: investigative genetic genealogy. Unlike conventional forensic DNA database searches, investigative genetic genealogy does not seek a direct match with a convicted offender. Instead, forensic specialists compare crime scene DNA with profiles voluntarily submitted by individuals to genealogy databases that permit law enforcement use under specific policies and legal conditions. The purpose is to identify biological relatives of the unknown individual and use genealogical research to generate investigative leads. Before investigators could pursue this approach, forensic scientists first evaluated the biological evidence preserved from the original crime scenes. The evidence had to be of sufficient quality to generate the type of genetic profile required for genealogical comparison. Because investigators in the 1970s had carefully collected and preserved biological material, laboratories were able to produce the necessary genetic data despite the passage of many decades. Specialized forensic laboratories then analyzed the genetic information and identified distant biological relatives of the unknown offender within participating genealogy databases. These results did not identify a suspect directly. Instead, they provided starting points for extensive genealogical research conducted by trained specialists. Genealogists examined historical records, including birth certificates, marriage records, census information, obituaries, newspaper archives, military records, and other public documents to construct family trees extending across multiple generations. By comparing genetic relationships with known facts about the investigation, including geography, age, sex, and opportunity, investigators gradually narrowed the number of possible individuals. This process required close collaboration between genealogists and detectives. While genealogists reconstructed family relationships, investigators independently verified historical information, reviewed employment histories where appropriate, compared residential locations, and evaluated whether individuals identified through genealogical analysis could reasonably be associated with the known timeline of the crimes. Eventually, the investigation focused on Joseph James D'Angelo, a former police officer who had previously lived in areas relevant to portions of the investigation. Importantly, genealogical analysis alone was not considered sufficient evidence for identification. Consistent with established investigative procedures, detectives sought independent forensic confirmation before reaching any conclusions. Investigators conducted surveillance to obtain a legally collectible discarded DNA sample associated with D'Angelo. Law enforcement commonly uses abandoned items, such as objects voluntarily discarded in public, to obtain biological material, provided the collection complies with applicable legal standards. The recovered DNA sample was submitted to a forensic laboratory for comparison with the DNA profile developed from the original crime scene evidence. According to investigators, the comparison established that the DNA obtained from D'Angelo matched the forensic profile associated with the Golden State Killer crimes. This laboratory confirmation provided the scientific basis for the next stage of the investigation. On April 24, 2018, law enforcement officers arrested Joseph James D'Angelo at his residence in Citrus Heights, California. The arrest represented the culmination of more than 4 decades of investigative work involving numerous law enforcement agencies, forensic laboratories, prosecutors, genealogists, and crime scene specialists. The announcement received international attention. For many investigators, the arrest demonstrated the extraordinary long-term value of preserving biological evidence. Material collected in the 1970s, long before DNA profiling existed as an investigative tool, ultimately became the foundation for identifying a suspect through technologies that had not yet been imagined when the crimes occurred. The investigation also became a landmark example of investigative genetic genealogy's potential. It illustrated how traditional detective work and modern forensic science can complement one another. Genealogical research generated investigative leads, But those leads required independent verification through conventional investigative methods and laboratory DNA comparison before law enforcement proceeded with an arrest. Following the arrest, agencies across the United States began evaluating other unsolved violent crimes for potential genealogical investigation, while investigative genetic genealogy remains subject to legal, ethical, and policy considerations. The Golden State Killer investigation demonstrated that preserved forensic evidence could be re-examined using entirely new scientific methodologies. Many years after a crime occurred, the case fundamentally changed the landscape of cold case investigations. It reinforced several enduring principles: preserve biological evidence whenever possible, maintain comprehensive investigative documentation, periodically review unresolved cases as technology evolves, and integrate new scientific methods with established investigative practices. These lessons continue to influence homicide investigations throughout the United States and internationally, making the Golden State Killer investigation one of the most significant examples of modern forensic innovation. On the morning of April 24th, SIL 2018, investigators executed an arrest warrant at the Citrus Heights, California home of Joseph James D'Angelo. The operation was the culmination of months of investigative work following the successful use of investigative genetic genealogy. More than 40 years had passed since the earliest crimes attributed to the offender, and for many investigators, the arrest represented one of the most significant developments in the history of American cold case investigations. Law enforcement agencies had planned the operation carefully. Detectives had already obtained and forensically compared a legally collected, discarded DNA sample with the DNA profile developed from biological evidence preserved during the original investigations. According to investigators, the laboratory comparison demonstrated that the DNA profiles matched, providing the scientific basis for the arrest. The investigation that led to D'Angelo's identification involved numerous agencies across California, including local police departments, sheriff's offices, prosecutors, forensic laboratories, and federal partners. Because the crimes had occurred in multiple jurisdictions over many years, coordination among agencies was essential throughout both the historical investigation and the modern review. Following the arrest, prosecutors filed charges reflecting crimes committed in several California counties. The charging process required careful examination of historical case files, preserved evidence, investigative reports, witness statements, and applicable statutes. Each jurisdiction reviewed its own cases while coordinating with other prosecuting authorities to ensure consistency and accuracy. The DNA evidence remained central to the investigation, but it was not considered in isolation. Detectives also reviewed historical records documenting D'Angelo's residences, employment history, and other information relevant to the timeline of the offenses. As with any major criminal investigation, prosecutors sought to assemble evidence capable of supporting the charges through multiple sources where possible. Public reaction to the arrest was immediate. For decades, the unknown offender had been known by several names, including the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker, before investigators concluded that these crimes had been committed by the same individual. The identification of a suspect therefore resolved one of the longest-running questions in California criminal investigations. The case also brought renewed attention to the victims and their families. Many had waited decades without knowing whether the offender would ever be identified. Although the passage of time could not erase the impact of the crimes, the arrest represented a significant investigative milestone after years of uncertainty. Investigative genetic genealogy likewise became the focus of national discussion. Criminal justice professionals viewed the investigation as a demonstration of how advances in forensic science could assist long-standing investigations when biological evidence had been properly preserved. At the same time, legal scholars and policymakers examined the appropriate use of genealogy databases, emphasizing the importance of privacy protections, judicial oversight where required, and adherence to applicable laws and agency policies. The investigation also reinforced the importance of evidence preservation. Biological material collected during crime scene examinations in the 1970s had remained suitable for sophisticated DNA analysis decades later because investigators had documented, packaged, and stored the evidence according to accepted forensic procedures. Without those early preservation efforts, later scientific analysis would likely have been impossible. For law enforcement agencies, the case became an influential example of the value of periodically reviewing unsolved violent crimes. Rather than assuming that historical investigations had reached permanent dead ends, many agencies expanded cold case programs designed to reassess preserved evidence using newly available forensic technologies. Training programs for detectives and forensic personnel increasingly reference the investigation when discussing long-term evidence management. The case demonstrated that careful documentation, secure chain of custody procedures, comprehensive record keeping, and interagency cooperation can preserve investigative opportunities for decades. The arrest also illustrated that modern forensic investigations depend upon both scientific innovation and traditional detective work. Genealogical analysis generated investigative leads, but detectives still conducted surveillance, historical research, records analysis, and laboratory confirmation before making an arrest. This combination of methods remains a defining characteristic of successful cold case investigations. Today, the Golden State Killer investigation is widely recognized as a landmark in forensic history. It demonstrated the practical application of investigative genetic genealogy, reinforced the importance of preserving biological evidence, and showed how decades of careful investigative work could ultimately benefit from scientific techniques unavailable when the crimes originally occurred. The case continues to influence homicide investigations, forensic laboratory practices, and cold case strategies throughout the United States and beyond. Following the April 2018 arrest of Joseph James D'Angelo, prosecutors from multiple California jurisdictions began coordinating one of the most extensive criminal prosecutions in the state's history. Because the crimes attributed to the Golden State Killer had occurred across numerous counties over more than a decade, the legal proceedings required close cooperation among district attorneys, investigators, forensic scientists, and victims' representatives. The charges reflected crimes committed in several jurisdictions, including multiple counts of murder and additional offenses connected to the historical investigations. Prosecutors reviewed decades of investigative files, forensic laboratory reports, witness statements, and preserved physical evidence to determine which charges could be pursued under California law. Although statutes of limitations affected the prosecution of certain non-homicide offenses, murder charges remained prosecutable. The DNA evidence developed during the investigation formed an important part of the prosecution's case. According to court records, forensic scientists compared DNA obtained from preserved crime scene evidence with DNA legally collected from D'Angelo. Prosecutors argued that the laboratory findings linked him to numerous crime scenes investigated over many years. The prosecution also relied upon the extensive documentation preserved during the original investigations. Crime scene photographs, investigative reports, evidence logs, laboratory analyses, and witness statements provided historical context and supported the presentation of evidence gathered decades earlier. The careful preservation of these materials allowed prosecutors to reconstruct events despite the significant passage of time. As legal proceedings continued, the court considered both evidentiary issues and logistical challenges associated with crimes committed across multiple counties. The case involved numerous victims, multiple investigating agencies, and evidence spanning more than 4 decades. Coordinating these materials required substantial planning by prosecutors and court personnel. In June 2020, DeAngelo entered guilty pleas to multiple counts of murder and admitted numerous additional offenses as part of a negotiated resolution of the criminal proceedings. The agreement eliminated the need for a lengthy trial while ensuring that the court formally addressed the documented crimes within the framework established by California law. Before sentencing, the court conducted extensive victim impact proceedings. Survivors of the attacks and family members of homicide victims addressed the court, describing the long-term effects of the crimes on their lives. These statements formed an important component of the sentencing process, allowing victims to present their experiences directly to the court. In August 2020, the court sentenced DeAngelo to multiple consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The sentence formally concluded the criminal prosecution while recognizing the seriousness of the offenses established through the investigation and guilty pleas. The legal resolution of the case attracted international attention because of both the historical significance of the investigation and the role of investigative genetic genealogy in identifying the suspect. Legal scholars, forensic scientists, and law enforcement professionals examined the proceedings as an example of how preserved evidence and evolving forensic methods could support criminal prosecutions many years after the underlying offenses. The case also highlighted the importance of maintaining evidence according to accepted forensic standards. Biological evidence collected in the 1970s and 1980s remained available for modern DNA analysis because investigators had preserved it carefully and maintained documented chains of custody. Those procedures strengthened the evidentiary foundation presented during the prosecution. For criminal justice professionals, the proceedings demonstrated that successful cold case prosecutions depend upon more than scientific advances alone. Investigative documentation, witness interviews, crime scene processing, laboratory quality assurance, prosecutorial review, and judicial oversight all contributed to the ultimate resolution of the case. The Golden State Killer prosecution has since become a significant case study in law schools, forensic science programs, and law enforcement training. It illustrates how long-term investigations may progress from traditional detective work to modern DNA analysis and ultimately through complex legal proceedings that address crimes committed decades earlier. Beyond its legal significance, the case reinforced a broader principle within criminal justice. Unresolved investigations may still benefit from future scientific developments if evidence is preserved properly and investigative records are maintained carefully. The prosecution demonstrated how the combined efforts of multiple generations of investigators, forensic scientists, prosecutors, and support personnel can contribute to resolving even the most challenging historical cases. The Golden State Killer investigation is widely regarded as one of the most influential cold case investigations in modern criminal justice. While the crimes themselves profoundly affected victims, families, and communities throughout California, the investigation's eventual resolution also transformed the way law enforcement agencies approach unsolved violent crimes. Perhaps the most significant lesson concerns the preservation of evidence. During the original investigations in the 1970s and 1980s, crime scene personnel carefully documented locations, collected biological material, photographed evidence, and maintained chain of custody records according to the forensic standards of the time. Although DNA technology capable of identifying an unknown offender did not yet exist, those preservation efforts ensured that the evidence remained available for future analysis. As forensic science advanced during the following decades, laboratories developed increasingly sophisticated methods for analyzing biological evidence. DNA profiling became a standard investigative tool, allowing scientists to compare evidence recovered from different crime scenes and establish whether the same unknown individual was responsible for multiple offenses. In the Golden State Killer investigation, these developments helped confirm that crimes previously investigated by different agencies were linked to a single offender. The investigation also demonstrated the limitations of conventional DNA databases. Even after a complete forensic DNA profile had been developed, investigators did not initially identify the offender because his DNA was not present in the available law enforcement databases. This challenge encouraged investigators to explore emerging techniques that eventually led to the use of investigative genetic genealogy. Investigative genetic genealogy represented a major development in forensic investigations. Rather than searching for an exact DNA match, the technique identifies biological relatives through genealogy databases that permit law enforcement access under defined policies and legal conditions. Genealogical research can then narrow the pool of possible individuals, after which detectives seek independent confirmation through traditional investigative methods and direct forensic comparison. The Golden State Killer investigation became the first nationally recognized example of this methodology, leading to the identification of a suspect in a major serial crime investigation. Although investigative genetic genealogy had been discussed within forensic communities before 2018, the successful resolution of this case demonstrated its practical value on a large scale. Following the arrest of Joseph James D'Angelo, numerous law enforcement agencies throughout the United States began reviewing unsolved homicide and sexual assault investigations to determine whether preserved biological evidence might be suitable for genealogical analysis. Specialized cold case units expanded their collaboration with forensic laboratories and professional genealogists as investigative practices evolved. The case also reinforced the importance of interdisciplinary cooperation. Detectives, crime scene investigators, forensic biologists, laboratory analysts, genealogists, prosecutors, legal advisors, and evidence technicians each contributed specialized expertise throughout different phases of the investigation. The eventual identification of the suspect resulted from the combined efforts of multiple professions working over several decades. Another lasting impact involved evidence retention policies. Many agencies reviewed procedures governing the storage of biological evidence associated with serious violent crimes. Secure environmental controls, digital inventory systems, and standardized chain of custody documentation became increasingly important as investigators recognized that evidence collected today might be examined using technologies developed years or even decades later. The investigation further influenced professional education. Police academies, homicide investigation courses, forensic science programs, and university criminal justice departments frequently reference the Golden State Killer case when discussing evidence preservation, interagency cooperation, forensic DNA analysis, and the practical application of investigative genetic genealogy. Researchers have also examined the case to better understand the relationship between technological innovation and traditional detective work. One consistent conclusion is that scientific advances do not replace conventional investigations. Instead, modern forensic methods are most effective when supported by meticulous crime scene processing, comprehensive documentation, careful legal oversight, and experienced investigative judgment. The case additionally contributed to discussions surrounding privacy, ethics, and the responsible use of genealogy databases. Policymakers, legal scholars, forensic scientists, and law enforcement agencies continue evaluating appropriate standards governing investigative genetic genealogy to ensure that public safety objectives remain balanced with individual privacy, considerations, and legal protections. Today, the Golden State Killer investigation is regarded as a landmark in forensic history. It demonstrated that evidence preserved decades earlier could become the foundation for entirely new investigative opportunities as science evolved. More broadly, it reinforced a principle that continues to guide modern homicide investigations. Careful work performed at the very beginning of an investigation may ultimately determine whether future generations of investigators have the tools necessary to seek answers long after the crime itself has passed into history. The Golden State Killer investigation occupies a unique place in the history of modern criminal investigations. Although it is remembered for the identification and prosecution of Joseph James D'Angelo, its broader significance lies in how the case influenced forensic science, evidence management, and the investigation of violent crimes throughout the United States. One of the investigation's most enduring lessons is the importance of evidence preservation. Crime scene investigators working during the 1970s collected biological evidence according to the standards available at the time, without knowing that future DNA technologies would eventually make that evidence central to the investigation. Their careful documentation and storage practices ensured that biological material remained suitable for advanced laboratory testing decades later. The investigation also demonstrated the importance of maintaining comprehensive investigative records. Cold case investigations frequently span multiple generations of detectives and forensic specialists. Detailed reports, photographs, laboratory analyses, interview summaries, evidence inventories, and investigative notes allowed later investigators to understand previous work and continue the investigation without losing critical historical information. Another major contribution of the case involves interagency cooperation. The crimes occurred across numerous California jurisdictions, requiring local police departments, sheriff's offices, district attorneys, forensic laboratories, and federal agencies to share information over many years. The eventual success of the investigation reflected sustained collaboration rather than the work of any single organization. The widespread attention surrounding the case also accelerated interest in investigative genetic genealogy. After the public announcement of D'Angelo's arrest in 2018, law enforcement agencies nationwide began evaluating whether preserved biological evidence from unsolved homicides and sexual assaults might be suitable for similar analysis. Many agencies established formal review procedures to determine which cases could benefit from this methodology. At the same time, the case prompted important legal and ethical discussions. Policymakers, courts, forensic scientists, and privacy experts considered how genealogy databases should be used during criminal investigations. Questions regarding informed consent, database participation, judicial oversight, and privacy protections became central topics as agencies developed policies governing investigative genetic genealogy. The investigation also highlighted the continuing role of traditional detective work. Genealogical analysis generated investigative leads, but detectives still conducted surveillance, reviewed historical records, examined timelines, verified family relationships, and obtained legally collected DNA samples for direct forensic comparison. The investigation demonstrated that scientific innovation functions most effectively when combined with established investigative practices. For forensic laboratories, the case reinforced the value of maintaining rigorous scientific standards. Laboratory quality assurance, documentation, peer review, and validated analytical procedures were essential to ensuring that forensic conclusions could withstand legal scrutiny. Advances in technology remain meaningful only when supported by reliable scientific methodology. The Golden State Killer investigation further influenced evidence retention practices across many jurisdictions. Agencies increasingly recognized that biological evidence from unsolved violent crimes should be preserved whenever practical because future scientific developments may allow new analyses unavailable today. Improvements in environmental storage, digital evidence tracking, and chain of custody documentation became priorities for many evidence management programs. Educational institutions also incorporated the investigation into criminal justice and forensic science curricula. Universities, police academies, and professional training organizations use the case to illustrate the interaction between crime scene investigation, forensic biology, investigative strategy, legal procedure, and scientific innovation. It has become a frequently cited example of how careful investigative work can retain value across decades. Researchers studying cold case investigations likewise view the case as an important demonstration of long-term investigative persistence. Rather than relying upon a single breakthrough, the investigation progressed through the cumulative efforts of numerous investigators, forensic scientists, prosecutors, genealogists, and evidence specialists over more than 40 years. The case has also encouraged agencies to conduct systematic reviews of historical investigations. Rather than treating older cases as permanently inactive, many departments now periodically reassess preserved evidence, evaluate emerging forensic technologies, and compare historical records against newly available investigative resources. This proactive approach has contributed to renewed investigations in numerous previously unsolved homicide cases. Ultimately, the legacy of the Golden State Killer investigation extends beyond the resolution of one criminal case. It illustrates how scientific progress, meticulous evidence preservation, comprehensive documentation, and sustained interagency cooperation can reshape the investigation of violent crime. The case remains a landmark example of how modern forensic science can complement traditional detective work, providing valuable lessons for investigators responsible for both current and future cold case investigations. The Golden State Killer investigation demonstrated that one of the most valuable resources in any homicide or sexual assault investigation is not necessarily a witness or a confession. It is properly preserved evidence. Long before modern DNA analysis existed, investigators collected biological material, documented crime scenes, photographed evidence, and maintained detailed records using the best forensic practices available at the time. Those decisions ultimately made later scientific analysis possible. When many of the crimes occurred during the 1970s and 1980s, forensic DNA profiling had not yet become a practical investigative tool. Crime laboratories relied primarily on fingerprint examination, serology, trace evidence analysis, and other established forensic methods. Although these techniques provided important investigative information, they often could not identify an unknown offender with the precision that DNA analysis would later offer. Recognizing the importance of preserving physical evidence, investigators retained biological samples under controlled conditions whenever possible. They also maintained careful chain of custody documentation, recording who collected each item, how it was packaged, where it was stored, and every transfer that occurred afterward. These procedures protected the integrity of the evidence and ensured that future forensic examinations would remain scientifically reliable. As DNA technology developed during the late 20th century, laboratories revisited many historical investigations. Improved extraction techniques allowed scientists to recover genetic material from samples that previously could not be analyzed effectively. Enhanced laboratory equipment, validated testing procedures, and more sophisticated analytical software expanded the amount of information available from preserved biological evidence. In the Golden State Killer investigation, those scientific advances transformed evidence collected decades earlier into a powerful investigative resource. DNA analysis established that numerous crimes committed in different California jurisdictions had been committed by the same unknown individual. Although this finding did not immediately identify the offender, it confirmed that investigators were pursuing one person rather than multiple unrelated suspects. The case also demonstrated that evidence preservation extends beyond biological material. Crime scene photographs, investigative notes, witness interviews, maps, laboratory reports, and property records all contributed to the long-term investigation. These historical documents allowed successive generations of detectives to understand previous investigative decisions and continue building upon earlier work. Cold case investigations often involve detectives who were not yet employed when the original crimes occurred. Comprehensive documentation therefore becomes essential. Well-organized investigative files allow new investigators to evaluate historical evidence objectively while avoiding unnecessary duplication of earlier efforts. The Golden State Killer investigation further emphasized that forensic science and evidence management evolve together. Advances in laboratory capabilities are meaningful only if evidence has been preserved in a condition suitable for examination. Consequently, many law enforcement agencies have strengthened long-term evidence retention policies for serious violent crimes, recognizing that future technologies may reveal information unavailable today. Another important lesson concerns periodic case review. Scientific progress does not occur all at once. New analytical methods emerge gradually, creating opportunities to re-examine evidence that previously produced limited or inconclusive results. Many cold case units now conduct systematic reviews to determine whether preserved evidence may benefit from updated forensic techniques. The investigation also illustrates the importance of multidisciplinary cooperation. Crime scene investigators, evidence technicians, forensic biologists, detectives, prosecutors, and records specialists each contribute to preserving the integrity of an investigation. Success depends not only on scientific innovation, but also on consistent professional standards maintained across decades. Following the identification and prosecution of Joseph James D'Angelo, agencies throughout the United States increasingly reviewed unresolved violent crimes involving preserved biological evidence. Many departments expanded cold case programs and invested additional resources in evidence management, digital record systems, and forensic partnerships. These efforts reflect a growing recognition that historical investigations remain capable of producing meaningful results when supported by modern science. Today, The Golden State Killer investigation serves as a leading example in forensic education and law enforcement training. It demonstrates that careful crime scene processing, comprehensive documentation, secure evidence storage, and rigorous chain of custody procedures can preserve investigative opportunities far into the future. More broadly, the case reinforces a principle that continues to shape modern criminal investigations. Evidence collected today may become the key to solving a case many years from now, provided it is preserved with the same care and professionalism that investigators expect of every major crime scene. The Golden State Killer investigation is now widely regarded as one of the most influential cold case investigations in modern forensic history. While the crimes themselves profoundly affected victims, families, and communities across California, the investigation's broader legacy lies in how it changed investigative practices, evidence management, and the use of forensic science in unresolved violent crimes. One of the clearest lessons from the case is that a cold case should not be viewed as a closed case. Instead, it is an investigation that remains open while investigators wait for new evidence, improved technology, or previously unavailable investigative methods. Advances in forensic science have repeatedly demonstrated that evidence collected decades earlier can become newly valuable when examined using modern analytical techniques. The Golden State Killer investigation reinforced the importance of preserving biological evidence for the long term. Crime scene investigators in the 1970s collected evidence using procedures designed to protect its integrity, even though the sophisticated DNA technologies available today did not yet exist. Those preservation efforts ultimately allowed forensic laboratories to generate DNA profiles capable of supporting future investigative work. The case also demonstrated the importance of comprehensive investigative documentation. Thousands of pages of reports, photographs, witness interviews, forensic analyses, evidence inventories, and investigative memoranda remained available to detectives who assumed responsibility for the investigation many years after the crimes occurred. This continuity allowed successive generations of investigators to build upon earlier work rather than beginning again from the start. Another significant lesson involves interagency cooperation. Because the crimes occurred across numerous jurisdictions, no single law enforcement agency possessed the complete investigative picture. Detectives, forensic laboratories, prosecutors, and support personnel shared information across county and municipal boundaries, gradually developing a comprehensive understanding of the offender's criminal activity. The investigation illustrates how cooperation can strengthen complex serial crime investigations that extend beyond individual jurisdictions. The successful application of investigative genetic genealogy also influenced forensic practice nationwide. Following the public announcement of Joseph James DeAngelo's arrest, many law enforcement agencies began evaluating unsolved homicide and sexual assault cases to determine whether preserved biological evidence might be suitable for genealogical analysis. Specialized training programs, forensic partnerships, and cold case review initiatives expanded significantly in the years that followed. At the same time, the investigation encouraged ongoing discussion regarding legal and ethical considerations. Policymakers, courts, forensic scientists, and privacy experts have continued evaluating appropriate standards governing the investigative use of genealogy databases. These discussions emphasize balancing public safety, individual privacy, transparency, and adherence to applicable laws and agency policies. The investigation further demonstrated that scientific innovation cannot replace traditional detective work. Genealogical analysis generated investigative leads, but detectives still verified historical records, reconstructed timelines, conducted surveillance, obtained legally collected comparison DNA, and corroborated findings using established investigative procedures. The case therefore illustrates how emerging forensic methods complement rather than replace conventional investigative practice. Evidence management has also evolved in response to lessons drawn from historical investigations such as this one. Many agencies now maintain enhanced evidence retention policies for unsolved violent crimes, incorporating secure environmental storage, digital inventory systems, standardized chain of custody documentation, and periodic evidence audits. These measures seek to preserve investigative opportunities for future scientific examination. Educational institutions have likewise incorporated the case into criminal justice curricula. Universities, police academies, and forensic science programs frequently examine the Golden State Killer investigation when teaching crime scene processing, forensic biology, investigative strategy, evidence preservation, and cold case methodology. The investigation serves as a practical example of how careful work performed during an initial investigation can remain valuable decades later. Researchers studying forensic innovation often identify the case as a milestone in the development of modern cold case investigations. It demonstrates that advances in laboratory science achieve their greatest value when supported by meticulous evidence preservation, comprehensive documentation, and sustained institutional commitment over many years. Ultimately, the Golden State Killer investigation illustrates the evolving relationship between science and criminal investigation. The resolution of the case did not result from a single technological breakthrough alone. Instead, it reflected decades of professional evidence management, interagency cooperation, forensic advancement, and persistent investigative effort. As a result, the case continues to shape homicide investigations, forensic policy, and cold case strategies throughout the United States, serving as an enduring example of how historical investigations can benefit from future scientific progress. The Golden State Killer investigation remains one of the most significant case studies in the history of modern criminal investigation. Although the crimes themselves span more than a decade and affected numerous victims and communities across California, the investigation's broader importance extends well beyond the identification and prosecution of a single offender. It fundamentally changed how investigators think about evidence, technology, and the long-term potential of unresolved cases. Perhaps the investigation's greatest contribution is its demonstration that evidence can retain investigative value for decades when preserved properly. Biological material collected during the original investigations in the 1970s and 1980s remained suitable for advanced DNA analysis many years later because crime scene investigators followed accepted forensic procedures. At the time, they could not have anticipated the scientific methods that would eventually become available. Yet their careful work created opportunities for future investigators. The case also illustrates the importance of viewing cold cases as ongoing investigations rather than abandoned files. While periods of inactivity may occur when no new leads are available, advances in forensic science, digital record management, and investigative methodology continue to create new opportunities. Many law enforcement agencies now conduct structured reviews of historical homicide investigations specifically to determine whether preserved evidence can be re-examined using current technology. Interagency cooperation proved equally important. The crimes attributed to the Golden State Killer crossed numerous jurisdictional boundaries, requiring police departments, sheriff's offices, forensic laboratories, prosecutors, and federal partners to exchange information over many years. The investigation demonstrated that effective communication and coordinated evidence sharing are essential when investigating offenders who operate across multiple jurisdictions. The successful use of investigative genetic genealogy represented another landmark development. While the methodology has since been applied in other investigations, the Golden State Killer case brought international attention to its potential. It also encouraged law enforcement agencies to develop policies governing its responsible use, balancing investigative effectiveness with legal requirements, ethical considerations, and privacy protections. The investigation further reinforced the continuing importance of traditional detective work. Modern forensic science generated powerful investigative leads, but detectives still verified documentary evidence, reconstructed historical timelines, conducted surveillance, obtained legally collected comparison DNA, and worked closely with prosecutors before criminal charges were pursued. The case demonstrated that scientific advances are most effective when integrated with established investigative practices. For forensic laboratories, the investigation highlighted the necessity of maintaining rigorous scientific standards. Laboratory accreditation, quality assurance procedures, peer review, validated testing methods, and careful documentation all contributed to the reliability of forensic conclusions presented during the investigation and subsequent court proceedings. Educationally, the case has become a central teaching example in forensic science, criminal justice, and law enforcement training programs. Students examine the investigation to understand evidence preservation, crime scene management, DNA analysis, cold case review procedures, and interdisciplinary cooperation. It serves as a practical demonstration of how professional standards applied during the earliest stages of an investigation can influence outcomes decades later. The investigation also prompted many agencies to strengthen evidence retention policies. Biological evidence associated with unsolved violent crimes is now more commonly preserved for extended periods, recognizing that future scientific advances may allow analyses that are not currently possible. This long-term perspective has become an increasingly important element of modern evidence management. Researchers continue to study the case because it illustrates the interaction between technological innovation and investigative persistence. The identification of the offender did not result from one breakthrough alone. It reflected decades of careful evidence preservation, comprehensive documentation, interagency collaboration, forensic advancement, and systematic investigative review, each stage built upon the work completed by earlier investigators. The Golden State Killer investigation therefore represents more than the resolution of a historically significant criminal case. It demonstrates how scientific progress can enhance, not replace, the fundamentals of professional investigation. It reminds investigators that every crime scene deserves meticulous attention, every piece of evidence deserves careful preservation, and every unsolved case may one day benefit from methods that have not yet been developed. Today, the case continues to influence homicide investigations around the world. Its legacy is reflected in stronger evidence preservation practices, expanded cold case units, greater collaboration among forensic specialists, and the responsible application of emerging technologies. More broadly, it reinforces a principle that remains central to criminal investigation. While technology evolves, the foundation of every successful investigation continues to be careful documentation, objective analysis, and a sustained commitment to following the evidence wherever it leads.